If you ever wanted to see how a great power can trip over its own confidence, welcome to Adrianople, 378 CE. The setting is Thrace, near the city of Adrianople, where Emperor Valens of the Eastern Roman Empire marched out to crush a Gothic force and expected a neat imperial victory by dinner. What he got instead was one of the worst battlefield disasters in Roman history. By sunset, his army was shattered, his command structure was in ruins, and the emperor himself was gone. No triumphant speech, no heroic regroup, just smoke, panic, and a very long list of men who did not make it home. Now this did not come out of nowhere. Rome in the 4th century still looked massive and intimidating, but it was running hot internally. The empire was administratively split, politics were full of rivalry, and frontier pressure was building. Then the Huns arrived in Eastern Europe like a thunderstorm with hooves, driving Gothic groups toward the Danube. In 376, large numbers of Goths asked to cross into Roman territory for safety. Rome said yes, partly for humanitarian reasons, partly because it liked the idea of recruiting tough fighters. On paper, this looked smart: settle refugees, gain manpower, stabilize the border. In practice, it became a lesson in how to turn a manageable crisis into a military nightmare. Roman officials in Thrace abused and extorted the newcomers, botched food distribution, and treated desperate families like bargaining chips. Instead of receiving structured settlement and support, many Goths got hunger, humiliation, and violence. When people flee one catastrophe and meet another at the checkpoint, they do not become docile taxpayers. They become very angry, very organized, and very willing to fight. The situation exploded into open revolt. What should have been a controlled integration process became a rolling war across the Balkans. By the time Valens prepared his campaign in 378, he was not dealing with scattered raiders. He was marching toward an enemy with every reason to mistrust Rome and every reason to win. Valens was not a cartoon villain or a complete fool. He had governed, campaigned, and survived imperial politics, which already puts him above average in late Roman job security. But he had two problems that matter in every century: bad information and worse incentives. He knew the Goths had become a serious threat, and he also knew Western Emperor Gratian was moving to support him. The prudent option was obvious: wait, combine forces, and crush the rebellion with overwhelming strength. Slow, boring, effective. The exact kind of plan that rarely wins applause in a court full of ambitious men. Instead, Valens faced the oldest trap in command history: the fear that someone else might get the credit. Advisors fed him estimates suggesting the enemy was beatable right now. Pride whispered that victory should belong to him, not shared with Gratian. Rivalry did the rest. He chose speed over certainty. It was the military equivalent of trying to finish a complex home repair in 10 minutes because your neighbor might post a better before and after photo first. As Valens advanced from Adrianople on 9 August 378, the army marched hard in summer heat. Equipment was heavy, water was limited, and fatigue built fast. Scouts reported enemy numbers that seemed to have been too low. That error was fatal, because underestimation is not just a statistic. It shapes every decision after it. If you think the enemy is 10,000, you fight one way. If he is larger, better positioned, and waiting for missing cavalry to return, you should fight very differently. Across the field, Gothic leader Fritigern did what skilled commanders do. He managed time like a weapon. He opened negotiations, sent envoys, offered talks, and kept the Romans waiting in armor under a brutal sun. Every minute wore down Roman cohesion and bought space for Gothic cavalry to rejoin the main force. Diplomacy here was not weakness. It was battlefield engineering with words. The Romans were standing in heat and dust, burning energy before the fight had even properly begun, while their enemy was shaping the tempo. At that point, Rome was still powerful. It was just no longer in control. When the battle finally ignited, it did so badly. Roman elements attacked before full coordination, either from impatience, confusion, or both. That premature engagement wrecked any clean deployment and pulled units forward unevenly. Then the Gothic cavalry arrived. Not politely, not gradually. They came in hard against exposed Roman formations and immediately changed the geometry of the fight. The Roman left appears to have pushed toward the Gothic Wagon Laager with some initial force, but support was inconsistent. Elsewhere, cavalry cohesion faltered, infantry got crowded, and command signals vanished into dust and noise. This is where battles stop being maps and become physics. Men packed too tightly cannot maneuver. Officers cannot relay orders through panic and screaming horses. Missile fire lands from angles troops are no longer facing. One local success turns meaningless because the line beside it has folded. Soon the Roman army was trapped in the worst possible condition, compressed, overheated, partially encircled, and unable to rotate tired troops effectively. Shields collided, formations tangled, and retreat lanes clogged with bodies and animals. In close combat, discipline can save you, if the formation still functions. At Adrianople, formation integrity dissolved faster than Roman commanders could restore it. What followed was less a tactical withdrawal and more a long, violent collapse. By late day, the disaster was complete. Senior officers were killed in large numbers. Large parts of the field army were destroyed. Surviving troops escaped in fragments rather than units. And then came the imperial question. Where was Valens? Reports diverged almost immediately. One tradition says he was wounded by an arrow and died amid the chaos. Another says attendants moved him to a nearby farmhouse that was later set on fire during fighting. Either way, his body was never clearly recovered. The emperor vanished into smoke, rumor, and history. For Roman morale, this was devastating. Losing troops is painful. Losing command structure is dangerous. Losing the emperor in battle to a force many elites had dismissed as manageable, that was an earthquake. Adrianople became more than a defeat. It became a symbol that Rome could still look gigantic and yet fail catastrophically when leadership, logistics, and timing all broke at once. After Adrianople, nobody serious could pretend the old frontier playbook still worked. The Eastern Empire had not ended, but it had been forced into a strategic reality check. Gratian moved quickly to stabilize matters, and Theodosius eventually took charge in the East, inheriting a military situation with no easy reset button. Rome could not simply delete problem, add legion. It had to negotiate, absorb, and adapt. That adaptation culminated in a settlement with Gothic groups in 382, allowing them to remain on imperial soil under treaty obligations. This was not a clean Roman victory parade. It was a compromise born from necessity, exhaustion, and arithmetic. Rome still had power, but it could not always impose outcomes on demand. It increasingly had to manage powerful armed communities within imperial space, rather than push every threat back beyond the map edge. So was Adrianople the fall of Rome? Not in one dramatic afternoon. The Eastern Empire survived and continued for centuries. But Adrianople shattered assumptions that had protected Roman confidence for generations. It proved that a professional Roman field army could be annihilated by an enemy it had underestimated. It proved that corruption at the administrative level can become bloodshed at the tactical level. And it proved that imperial ego can be just as dangerous as any cavalry charge. If you want the hard lesson, here it is. Empires usually do not fail because one opponent is magically unbeatable. They fail because they mishandle solvable problems until those problems arrive wearing armor. At Adrianople, the chain is brutally clear. Refugee mismanagement, official abuse, escalating revolt, rushed command decisions, tactical disarray, strategic shock. By the end, Rome had not merely lost a battle, it had paid, in one day, the compounded interest on years of bad governance. And maybe that is why Adrianople still feels modern. The uniforms change, the weapons change, the maps change, but the pattern is familiar. Leaders dismiss warnings, institutions cut corners, logistics get ignored,
Pride outruns planning, and then everyone acts surprised when reality sends the bill. In 378 CE, that bill arrived outside Adrianople. It was enormous, immediate, and collected in full.